Thanks for tuning in, guys, to the Pest and Lawn Ginja. And today we're going to talk about pre-emergents. Before we get in too deep today, I want to make sure that everybody at home has a baseline of what a pre-emergent does and how it functions. Now, the majority of us are going to use pre-emergents for crabgrass control in our lawn and in our gardens. But what pre-emergents do is they disrupt rooting after the plant goes through its germination process. And that's right, the plant does have to germinate or it doesn't work. Now, most of us are going to use a pre-emergent service in our lawns, in our garden areas, to disallow crabgrass from taking root in our lawns that come up during the summertime. Now, a pre-emergent in general is a chemical layer that's put into the soil about 1/4 of an inch all the way down to 1.5 inches down that disallows seeds from taking root. Now, part of this is the seed has to germinate, so it is not a pre-germinator. We need that weed seed to germinate because as it hits the chemical, that's when it disrupts mitosis, cell division, and chlorophyll uptake. One of the most important parts of the pre-emergent application is when you put the pre-emergents down. It's not necessarily the air temperature that you need to be concerned about, it's all about soil temperatures. Now, I carry this Bed Bath & Beyond meat thermometer so I can measure the soil 3 inches under. Typically, crabgrass is going to germinate at 55 degrees, which means that you want to have the soil temperatures be below 50 when you apply your pre-emergents in order to be effective. Now, let's talk a little bit about application rates because this can get a little confusing. Number one, you want to know your grass type. Your warm season grasses in general are going to take a higher dose of pre-emergents than your cool season grasses. Now, I wanted to give you a friendly reminder to familiarize yourself with the label of the product that you choose to purchase. Not only are they going to have a minimum and a maximum application rate that you can use for the season, but they're also going to have a minimum application rate for crabgrass prevention. And I find that on a lot of these labels, that minimum rate for crabgrass prevention is not the minimum or the maximum rate on the label. Now, you don't want to go above and beyond the application rates because you run the risk of leaching into the ground, which can be toxic and it's not favorable for the environment. Although the pre-emergents are highly insoluble in water, the one thing that breaks them down is soil microbes. And the hotter it ends up getting, the more microbial action that you're going to get that is going to chew through your pre-emergent services. Now, another question I wanted to go over real briefly is why would I choose a split app that gives me 2 to 4 months of control instead of just jumping to the high rate on the label that gives me 6 to 8 months of control? Now, the answer is pretty simple. It's going to depend on your local weather and climate. If your local temperature is really not going to get above 85 or 90 degrees during the summer, you may sustain that pre-emergent without the microbes chewing it up, and it will last 6 to 8 months. But if you're in an area like I am, where we constantly see above 90-degree weather from June all the way into August, that pre-emergent is going to get chewed up by the microbes and you're going to be left with nothing for your fall annuals. So it's really important to understand that a split app has its advantages if you're in an area like that. Now, most labels will allow you to take the maximum rate that it will allow for the year and just cut it in half. Now, in the summer, in the fall time, you want to apply the pre-emergents when the soil starts getting around 70 degrees, because as it drops below that, that's when you're going to start seeing those annuals and biennials in the fall germinating. Now, besides hot weather, there's a couple of other things that are going to impede the efficacy of pre-emergents. Lawn aeration, you want to make sure that you aerate the lawn before you apply your pre-emergents. Same thing with power raking. The third thing is just general maintenance with your weed whacking along the edges. I see weeds all the time along the edges and nothing in the middle of lawns because people have disrupted the soil enough, it makes it easy for weed seeds to come in. And my number one issue, proper watering. Don't let the soil dry out. Now, with so many different kinds of pre-emergents, how do you know which one's right for you? Let's go take a look. Now, right off the bat, you can tell I've got it divided into 2 separate categories. We've got our granular section, and then we have our spray section. Now, the difference between the two, in my opinion, is the spray you can paint on for a better, even distribution. Where the granular, it's kind of a pump and dump. You really hope that you get it out right, But the problem is the edges. The edges are going to struggle, and you're going to have to touch them up. A lot of you guys are wondering, hey, well, Ginja, why should I buy these products as opposed to just what I can get at my local hardware store with the Pre-Emergent in it? And frankly, it just comes down to the size of the granular. The smaller the granular, the better the coverage that you're going to get. So having a specialized Pre-Emergent that has a fine size granular in it is going to be far superior than the bigger size granular, because as it gets wet, it's going to distribute more even. Now I find the Pre-Emergents can get a little confusing. So what I've done here is I've separated them into different categories. Now all Pre-Emergents are categorized as selective herbicides, which usually when I think of selective herbicides, I think of something that is not going to kill the grass, but it's going to kill the weeds. Now in the case of Pre-Emergents, it's selective because it's going to get rid of the seeds that are post-germination in the process of rooting. However, I find there's a couple different categories. There are Pre-Emergents with post-emergent properties. So let's go through these. Now you'll notice here the Ginja's placed these different bags into 3 different categories because that's how I view them. They each do something different. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. The only thing that I really want you to pay attention to is the active ingredients and how I categorize it. So in group number 1, we've got Prodiamine, we have Isoxaben, and we have this bucket of Snapshot, which is a combined trifluralin and Isoxaben as well. Now, Isoxaben and Prodiamine equally work really, really well. The Prodiamine comes out very syrupy. In my opinion, this is the Ginja's #1 top pick for clay and sandy soils if you're just looking for an anti-rooter. That's all these do. When we get over here into category number 2, this active ingredient is called Dithiopyr. Now, Dithiopyr does really, really well with crabgrass prevention. Now, it's very permeable into the soil, and this is why I have a love-hate relationship to it as well, because if you overwater, it can easily get too far under the soil. It also doesn't overwinter well in climates that receive a lot of snow or rain because it pushes it too deep. Now the positives on this is it's got post-emergent control, and just like this bag says, it can be applied up to 4 weeks later for crabgrass prevention because it acts as a post-emergent up to the 3-leaf stage with crabgrass. So if you have clay soils, Dithiopyr works really, really well, but you want to apply it right at about that 45-50 degree marker. I personally don't like to overwinter with this product. Now in our 3rd category, we have a much better post-emergent herbicide. Pendulum 2G, it's getting really, really popular. It's got pendimethalin in it. Now the Pendulum has pendimethalin in it, which has a broader kill towards broadleaf weeds, or a broader label specific to post-emergent control. Now the one thing I found fascinating with the pendimethalin is if you have a ton of weeds, pendimethalin is a good idea because it will still give you post-emergent control for weeds that have not leafed out but have remained in the stem form, which these other 2 categories won't do. Last but not least on our list is Tenacity. Now, Tenacity is a different beast in and of itself. It's classified as a Group 27 herbicide. In my opinion, this is probably the safest herbicide on the list, which is kind of funny because a lot of people, I think it's the name that makes them feel uneasy about it, but it is one of the safest ones on the list in my opinion. Now, the best thing about it is if you're going to be overseeding a lawn, you can do 2 applications back to back with this over about 2 to 3 weeks, and then you can immediately overseed. So you're going to get pre-emergent control, plus it's not going to kill the seed that you put down, which these other ones can't do. Now, regardless of the product that you choose, it's really important to understand how the product gets to the soil. This is not a foliar application, it needs to be a soil application, which per the label, the majority of them are going to tell you need 1/2 inch of water or more to push it into the soil to get it active. It's really important that the product get into the soil because that's what causes the rooting issue. Now, if your intentions for any of these products are to take advantage of the post-emerging aspects of the herbicide, you need to let the product dry for 12 to 24 hours or to sit in a granular state on the leaf of the intended target pest for 12 to 24 hours before watering it in. Otherwise, it will not work. So I want to make sure that we analyze all sides of the spectrum, so I've developed a sheet here that I want to show you. It's got the product name, the active ingredient, and then we have the unit size, cost per unit, and then I've broken it down into cost per 1,000 square feet. Some of these bottles are bigger, some of them are smaller. I wanted to give you a broad spectrum on what's going on. You'll notice the Snapshot, which has the combined pre-emergents, the most expensive, but it's also not rated for turf grass on the label. The Pendulum, which is one of the more effective pre-emergents in my opinion, is the second most expensive at $6.37, which means that the cost for the average home is $22.28, which I believe is a reasonable application rate, even if you had to do that twice a year. Now these are at the midpoints of the label, so if you want to do a split app, you could do a split app. The Isoxaben, $3.05. The Prodiamine though, man, in a wettable, 32 cents per 1,000 square feet. So you buy one bottle, it's gonna last you years, but it's also way cheaper than all the others. Now, one thing that shocked me wasn't the dimension, but the tenacity, $1.23 per 1,000 square feet. That's nowhere near the $8.56 the Snapshot is, making Tenacity a very affordable option. I think sometimes we get fixated on the small bottle, but it actually does 4 to 5 acres in that one bottle. Now, obviously cost is a big factor, but you're probably wondering why you would do the pendylethalin and spend that much more money versus the Prodiamine, which is obviously cheapest out of any of them. Well, with any general herbicides, you want to switch them up. You want a different active ingredient to make sure that the efficacy rate stays high. Now, pendylethalin, you really don't have to switch up the product according to the manufacturer. The soil doesn't get used to it, the weeds don't get used to it. Where when it comes to the Prodiamine, the Dithiopyr, and the Isoxaben, it's best to put those on a rotation. So if you're just looking for general pre-emergents, make sure you switch those up every 1 to 2 years and put them on a 3-ring rotation for best results. All right, guys, this is the Pest and Lawn Ginja. I really appreciate you guys watching. If you guys have any questions or concerns, hit me up in the comments. Love to help you guys out. In the meantime, guys, we'll see you on the next round.